Death at Daisy's Folly. Chapter 15. It is impossible to love and be wise. Francis Bacon, Essays, 1625. Charles watched the prince stride jauntily away, wondering whether to laugh or be angry. He seemed to have very little comprehension of the dreadful reality of this situation. 2 people dead, and His Highness was concerned with getting to luncheon on time. Kate was also staring after the departing backs. "So I have been given permission to assist you," she said, obviously annoyed. "Even if I am a woman and an American," she paused, narrowing her eyes. "You don't suppose the prince really believes that silly business about the security of the realm, do you?" "I think he will seize any excuse to keep this crime out of the public eye," Charles replied. "Particularly if the killer turns out to be one of his friends. He has a terrible fear of scandal." "As do they all," Kate replied. "The women even more than the men." She frowned, and Charles noticed again, not for the first time that morning, how striking was the intelligence in her hazel eyes, and how lovely her russet hair piled high on her head under that foolishly tipped gold hat. But his thoughts were wrenched back to the subject by her next question. "Do you suppose, Charles, that the fear of scandal might have been a motive for this murder?" "It's certainly possible," he replied, and wondering again why this woman was so infernally interested in crime. Of course, it was that very interest which had prompted him to suggest her as his assistant. Remembering something Temple had said, he muttered half to himself, "It is almost as if you have been reading detective stories." "Pardon me?" He smiled, thinking that this one small revelation made light of a great deal that had puzzled him about the hitherto enigmatic Kate Ardley. "Was Temple right?" he asked. "Are you one of Doyle's devotees? Do you imagine yourself Dr. Watson to Sherlock Holmes?" The minute the words were out of his mouth, he realized how patronizing they must sound, and hoped he had not offended her. Where was the fault if a lady read crime stories for her amusement? But it was not offense that he had read in those green-flecked eyes. She searched his face intently, then, as if she had come to some conclusion, squared her shoulders and raised her chin and said, "I think, Charles, that it is time we spoke straightforwardly to one another. You know that I do not just read detective stories, I write them." Charles frowned, not quite sure he had heard her correctly. "Forgive me," he said. "I fear I don't." She sighed. "Let's not play games, Charles. I know you have guessed." "Guessed what, for heaven's sake?" "That I am Beryl Bardwell." Beryl Bardwell? He searched his memory. The author of The Duchess' Dilemma, the writer who is being spoken of as a female Conan Doyle? He stared at her. "You are telling me that you—" "I don't believe it." She gave a little gasp. "You mean you had not guessed?" "Guessed?" he exclaimed, throwing up his hands. "Great God in heaven, how could I have guessed a thing like that?" There was an audible out-breath, and she turned away so that her face was hidden. "You've read The Duchess's Dilemma?" "A day or 2 ago, upon the recommendation of Bradford Marston. He thought the setting and characters fit a situation that occurred in his family last spring. He wanted my opinion." Her cheeks reddened. "I should not have stayed so close to the facts." Charles shook his head, still bemused, still only half comprehending the situation altogether. The description of the Duchess, I recognized the similarities to Bradford's mother, of course, and wondered if the author might be acquainted with this family, but I never surmised that you— "I'm sorry," she said in a small voice. "I thought you knew." "Thought I knew!" he exclaimed, seized by an unexpectedly wild feeling. "I should have known, damn it! The truth was right there in front of me. Since the very day I met you, you've been absorbed in such matters." As he spoke, he heard the passion in his words, revealing his feeling for this confounded American woman who refused to know her place. "That is," he said, "I mean to say—" He stopped, lost in her eyes, unable to remember what he had meant to say. He lifted his arms and drew her into his embrace, feeling the fragrant sweetness of her body against his. Then his lips were on her mouth, and he was devouring her in a kiss that seemed to him to divulge every confused feeling in his heart, but a moment later he was wrenching himself free. "Forgive me," he muttered, gasping for breath. "I am dishonoring you and myself." Kate put her fingers on his cheek, turning his face so that he had to look into her eyes. "What is the dishonor in loving, Charles?" she asked gently. "Not in loving," he said. He took her hand and held it. "I do love you, Kate. I had made up my mind to ask you to marry me, but after I learned about Robert's illness, I must agree with your conclusion. It is not wise." He stopped. "Daisy tells me that you know about Robert." "Yes," she said, and looked him fully in the face. "I'm sorry for you, Charles. Losing a brother is a sad thing." "It is only one of the sadnesses," he said. "Robert enjoys the baronial life and has lived it with great pleasure. I've already determined that if I must take his place, I will continue to pursue my own interests, in so far as I can. But there are certain obligations I cannot avoid. I must manage the estates, assume the family seat in the House of Lords, occasionally appear socially. In this situation, a marriage between us—" She lowered her eyes. "I know. In this situation, a marriage to an Irish-American wife with a secret life as a writer cannot be wise." "But that's not what I mean at all. In such a situation you would be terribly unhappy. It is not a life you would enjoy." She was startled into looking at him. "If I were your wife, you would not see my writing as a thorn, or as a potential embarrassment." "If I were your husband," he countered, "would you not see my family and the estate and the damned social appearances as thorns? For they are, certainly." She considered for a moment. "I see that we would both bring certain liabilities to a marriage. Although, should I retire to the garret and scribble for days on end, you might begin to feel that you had the worst end of the bargain. Or should my name, your name, be somehow associated with Beryl Bardwell's stories. You may scribble at will," he exclaimed, "and if your identity should come to light, we shall have plenty to talk about at dinner parties, if we are invited. Oh, but we shall be. Almost any hostess in the land would welcome Beryl Bardwell, but do not assume that anyone will tell you anything they don't want to see in print." Her lips were trembling. "Then you are asking me to marry you in spite of everything?" He put his arms around her. "Will you, in spite of everything?" She hesitated for only a brief moment. "Yes," she said, her voice low but resolute. "Whether it is wise or not." He kissed her again, delighting in the way her arms slipped eagerly around his neck. It seemed to him that he could go on kissing her into the afternoon and the night and the next morning, and he reflected with stunned delight that soon, very soon perhaps, he would be free to do just that. But a moment later she pulled away and straightened her hat, which had tipped over one ear. She looked down. "I fear," she said, "that we are not showing the proper respect." He followed her gaze to the blanketed corpse lying on the path right beside them. "Good Lord," he groaned, "I forgot all about Reggie."